Hello again. For various reasons that I won't go into at the moment, there have in recent years been concerted efforts to construct a series of myths about African history. One of these is that there were mighty civilisations there before the coming of white Europeans. There is, of course, not a word of truth in it, but it suits many people to play along with this fantasy history and pretend that African cities rivaled those of Europe at the time. One example often mentioned is the so-called Walls of Benin, although they were really nothing of the kind. It is claimed that these walls were longer than the Great Wall of China and yet have been ignored by Western archaeologists, probably for racist reasons. This is a marvellous piece of deception because mentioning the Great Wall of China in this way at once summons up in our minds images of a towering stone-built wall. Fancy such a thing being constructed in Africa before the arrival of Europeans. The only problem is, of course, that these great walls never existed. They are entirely a product of the imagination. There were no walls of Benin. You will find many internet articles about them. You will find fabulous reconstructions of them, but they're a made-up story. The thumbnail to this video shows this imaginary city as it might have been in Africa during the medieval period. It looks as though it could have rivaled Greece or some other city of classical antiquity, doesn't it? Just look at those stout walls and imagine that in Benin these walls ran for an incredible 10,000 miles, which is what is claimed all over the internet. 10,000 miles of walls. Benin was a tribal kingdom situated in what is now Nigeria. It was a centre for slave trading, and this practice continued after the British abolished slavery and tried to suppress slave trading in Africa. Benin was, of course, also famous for human sacrifice, which was conducted publicly in the city at the heart of the territory. Viewers may have heard of the Benin bronzes, which are native artwork which some museums are now sending to Nigeria. There were no Benin walls. All the pictures mocked up to show a walled city are fantasies. What there was in Benin were ditches and mud embankments. In Epping Forest, not far from here, are similar structures. These are Iron Age camps which were made by digging a deep ditch and then piling the earth up to make a crude barrier. Offa's Dyke on the border with Wales is the same kind of thing. It runs for 80 miles or so, and it's precisely the same. It's a ditch and bank. It's made of earth. It's an earthwork. To pretend that these ditches and banks of earth were city walls is quite mad. I give a link to an article about the Walls of Benin in the description to this video, and you will see the same claims repeated all over the internet whenever you Google the subject. It is alleged that the 1974 edition of the Guinness Book of Records mentions these walls, and a science writer called Fred Pearce has made some dramatic claims about them. For example, they stretch for over 10,000 miles. I'm always suspicious when the same few people or sources are quoted all the time about this or that subject. And whenever you read about Benin, you will read exactly the same sources. Fred Pearce, who wrote an article in the New Scientist, and also the 1974 edition of the Guinness Book of Records crops up time and again. I give a link to an article on the subject from the Guardian newspaper, which claims that the Africans had mastered fractals and used complicated mathematics to arrange their mud buildings. This is nonsense too. There are scarcely any traces left of those piles of mud, which are said to be the walls of Benin, and those traces that can be seen look exactly like Amesbury Banks in Epping Forest, the Iron Age camp I mentioned earlier. Calling them walls is absurd. And yet, the internet has masses of reconstructions of the walls of Benin on it. Look at the thumbnail to this video and then skim around a bit through the internet and see how many other images you can find of city walls of Benin. It's fascinating that something which is completely non existent and never existed could have become so well known.